Antonelli did not just win Monaco. He walked out of the most dangerous race of the season with history in his hands, Mercedes celebrating, Ferrari furious, Red Bull under pressure, and the entire paddock asking one terrifying question. Was this victory actually too perfect to be trusted? Because after the checkered flag, the word investigation started spreading, and suddenly Monaco was no longer just about a 19-year-old genius controlling the streets like a veteran. It became about steward documents, red flag chaos, Hamilton being cleared, Red Bull being questioned, and a Mercedes win that looked so dominant, some people immediately started searching for the secret behind it. But here's the part most fans missed. The loudest accusation was not the same as the real investigation. And by the end, the truth reveals something even more explosive than a penalty. Because if Antonelli's win was legal, then Formula One may have a much bigger problem than Mercedes' controversy. It may have just watched the beginning of a new era. Subscribe to the channel. Monaco is not a normal race. It never has been. On most Formula One circuits, a fast car can stretch its legs. A driver can recover from a small mistake. A team can use strategy, tire life, or straight-line speed to repair a bad moment. But Monaco does not work like that. Monaco is a cage made of barriers, yachts, history, and pressure. The track is so narrow that every corner feels like a test of nerve. One small mistake does not just cost a tenth of a second. It can end the race instantly. That is why Antonelli's win felt so powerful. He was not just driving quickly. He was surviving a place designed to expose fear. And that matters, because when a 19-year-old rookie wins in Monaco, people do not react calmly. They do not simply say, "Good job, great weekend, move on." They start looking closer. They ask how he stayed so composed. They ask why Mercedes looked so controlled. They ask why his teammate George Russell could not produce the same result. They ask why Lewis Hamilton, now wearing Ferrari red, could get close, but never close enough to break him. And this is where the first layer of suspicion began. Because Antonelli was not supposed to make it look this easy. He came into Formula One with enormous pressure already on his shoulders. He was not filling an ordinary seat. He was stepping into the space left behind by Lewis Hamilton, one of the most successful drivers the sport has ever seen. That kind of seat does not give you time. Every qualifying lap becomes a judgment. Every radio message becomes a clue. Every mistake becomes a headline. And every victory becomes more than a victory. It becomes evidence. Evidence for the people who believe Mercedes found the next superstar. And evidence for the people who believe Mercedes found something else. That is the dangerous part. Because in Formula One, dominance is never treated as innocent for long. When a team suddenly looks too strong, rivals start watching the car differently. Fans start replaying on boards. Reporters start asking sharper questions. Every upgrade becomes suspicious. Every fast sector looks like a secret. And after Monaco, Antonelli gave them the perfect problem. He did not scrape into the win. He controlled it. He started from pole. He stayed calm through the pressure. And when the race turned chaotic, he still stood at the center of the story. But here is what made the situation explode. The weekend already had the language of controversy around it before people fully understood what the controversy was. There were fines. There were steward notes. There were investigations. There was a safety car issue involving Hamilton. There was a red flag. There was a post-race case involving Red Bull and Isaac Hadjar. So when fans heard the word investigation, many of them connected it to the biggest name in the headline. Antonelli, Mercedes, the winner. But that connection is where the confusion begins. Because the real question was not simply, did someone get investigated? The real question was, who was actually under investigation, and what did it have to do with Antonelli's win? That difference changes everything. And once you separate the noise from the facts, Monaco starts to look like two different races happening at the same time. One race happened on the track, where Antonelli delivered the kind of performance that can change a career forever. The other happened after the checkered flag, inside documents, steward rooms, regulations, and online arguments, where a clean result started to look suspicious simply because the weekend around it was so messy. That is why this story is bigger than one trophy. It is about trust. Trust in Mercedes. Trust in the rules. Trust in the stewards. Trust in a teenage driver who may have arrived faster than the sport was ready to accept. And the uncomfortable truth is this. Antonelli did not need to be guilty of anything for the controversy to grow. He only needed to be too good, too soon, in the wrong race, at the wrong moment. Because Monaco does not just crown winners. Sometimes, it creates doubts that follow them long after the podium. The first mistake people made after Monaco was thinking the word investigation meant one simple thing. It did not. In Formula One, an investigation can be massive, or it can be tiny. It can threaten a race win, or it can disappear with no penalty at all. It can involve a driver's behavior, a team procedure, a technical part, a timing issue, or even something that happened before the cars ever lined up on the grid. And that is exactly why this story became so easy to twist. Because Monaco had real steward activity. It had real rule breaches. It had real documents. But the moment those facts entered the online world, they were pulled into one bigger, darker narrative. Mercedes under suspicion. Antonelli too fast. A Monaco win that might not be as clean as it looked. That sounds explosive. But the real trail begins somewhere much smaller. Before the race even reached its most dramatic moments, the weekend had already created a strange background noise. Charles Leclerc and Lando Norris were fined for arriving late to a mandatory press conference. George Russell was fined for speeding in the pit lane by a tiny margin. Lando Norris and McLaren were connected to an alleged technical infringement during practice. None of that proved anything against Mercedes. None of that threatened Antonelli's pole. None of that meant the winner was in danger. But it gave the weekend a feeling. And in Formula One, feeling can be dangerous. Because when the paddock already smells smoke, even a normal spark can look like fire. Then qualifying arrived. Antonelli put the Mercedes on pole, and suddenly the tone changed. It was not just that he was fast. It was where he was fast. Monaco is not a place where raw power saves you. It is a place where the driver has to trust the car centimeter by centimeter, brushing the walls, controlling the throttle, and never letting panic reach the steering wheel. A pole lap there does not feel like a lap. It feels like a confession. The car tells you everything. The driver tells you everything. And Antonelli's lap seemed to say the same thing from the first sector to the last. Mercedes had arrived with something serious. That was enough to set people off. Because every era of Formula One has this moment. A team turns up, looks calmer than everyone else, and the questions begin. What did they find? What are they doing differently? Is it genius, or is it something the rule makers have not caught yet? For Mercedes, this was not a new kind of pressure. But for Antonelli, it was brutal. He was still a teenager, yet the sport was already treating his speed like a legal mystery. The better he looked, the more some people searched for another explanation. And then the race gave the rumor machine exactly what it needed. Chaos. Antonelli started from pole and controlled the early laps with a kind of silence that makes rivals nervous. He did not look desperate. He did not look like a rookie hanging on. He looked like the race was happening at his speed, on his terms, around his rhythm. Behind him, Lewis Hamilton sat in second for Ferrari. That picture alone made the stakes feel unreal. Hamilton, the man who used to define Mercedes, chasing the young driver who had taken his place. Ferrari against Mercedes. Experience against youth. The past trying to catch the future through the streets of Monaco. And for a while, that was the story. Until the safety car changed the shape of the race. When Lance Stroll crashed, the field was controlled. Speeds dropped. The cars bunched up. Every driver had to manage temperature, distance, and timing. It sounds calm, but it is actually one of the most delicate moments in a Grand Prix. Because under a safety car, you are not racing normally. But you are still competing. You are warming tires. Saving brakes. Watching gaps. Preparing for the restart. Trying not to give the stewards any reason to look your way. And Hamilton did get looked at. The allegation was that he had left more than 10 car lengths to the car ahead during the safety car phase. That may sound like a small thing, but in Formula One, distance under neutralized conditions matters. Too much of a gap can affect the pack. It can change how drivers prepare. It can influence the timing of the restart. For a moment, Hamilton's second place carried a question mark. And that mattered, because if Hamilton had been punished, the final order could have changed. The pressure on Antonelli might have looked different. The whole story of the final sprint could have shifted. But Hamilton was cleared. No further action. Those 3 words should have cooled the situation. Instead, they added another layer. Because now Monaco had produced yet another official investigation that ended without a penalty. Another moment where the race looked unstable, then snapped back into place. And then came the red flag. Charles Leclerc's crash turned the Grand Prix from tense to chaotic. For any driver, crashing at Monaco is painful. For Leclerc, it cuts deeper. This is his home race. These streets are part of his identity. When he hits the barriers there, it does not feel like just another accident. It feels like Monaco itself has turned against him. But the crash did more than break Ferrari hearts. It damaged the surface and stopped the race. A red flag changes everything. It freezes the contest. It pulls the cars back. It gives teams time to think, time to check, time to prepare, but not complete freedom. And that difference matters more than most fans realize. During a red flag, teams can do certain allowed tasks. But they cannot simply treat the car like it is sitting in the garage on a normal afternoon. The race is still alive. The result is still forming. The car is still part of the competition. That is why any work done during a suspension can become sensitive. And this is where the real investigation began to form. Not around Antonelli. Not around Mercedes. Around Isaac Hadjar's Red Bull. Hadjar had been running toward a huge result. A Monaco podium for a rookie is not a small detail. It is the kind of result that changes how a driver is discussed inside a team. It gives weight to his name. It gives pressure to his rivals. It gives Red Bull something to protect. But during the suspension, officials noted that mechanics were working on his car in a way that was not permitted under the regulation. That single detail became the most important legal issue of the day. Because if Red Bull had gained an advantage during the red flag, Hadjar's podium could have been at risk. And if Hadjar lost that podium, Oscar Piastri could have inherited third. So while the internet shouted about Mercedes, the real podium threat was happening behind the winner, not in front of him. That is the twist. The loudest story was pointing at Antonelli. The official process was pointing somewhere else. And once you understand that, the whole Monaco controversy starts to look different. It was not a clean scandal with one guilty party and one obvious punishment. It was a messy weekend where separate rule questions collided with a dominant Mercedes win, and people stitched them together into something larger than the evidence allowed. But the Hadjar case was not imaginary. It was real. The question was whether the Red Bull mechanics had done work that broke the rules during the red flag. And the reason no penalty followed was just as important as the investigation itself. When the team was questioned, they stopped the work. They reversed the car back to its previous state. No part was replaced. No permanent change stayed on the car. That distinction likely saved them. Because the stewards were not just asking, did someone touch the car? They were asking, did the team gain something they should not have gained? And based on the final outcome, the answer was not strong enough for punishment. Hadjar kept third. Hamilton kept second. Antonelli kept first. But the damage to the narrative was already done. By then, the phrase Mercedes controversy had spread. The idea that Antonelli's win was under threat had gained energy. And once a story like that moves, facts do not always catch it quickly. That is the most dangerous part of this entire Monaco situation. The truth arrived slower than the suspicion. And suspicion is addictive. It gives fans something to argue about. It gives rivals something to hint at. It gives every dominant lap a darker meaning. It takes a brilliant drive and turns it into a question. Was he really that good? Was the car really that legal? Was Monaco showing us talent, or a loophole? Those questions were not answered by the Hadjar investigation, because the Hadjar investigation was not about Antonelli. But emotionally, they stayed attached to him anyway. Because Antonelli was the face of the weekend. He was the teenager on pole. The driver controlling the race. The new Mercedes leader. The championship frontrunner. The person standing exactly where everyone was looking when the word investigation entered the conversation. And in Formula 1, being where everyone is looking can be almost as dangerous as doing something wrong. That is why the next part matters even more. Because once the official investigations ended with no further action, the spotlight should have moved away from punishment. But it did not. It moved toward something harder to prove, and much harder for Mercedes to escape. The belief that their advantage might be too big to be normal.